tonight's topic about women in Indian society. And we are actually very privileged to have two speakers tonight giving kind of their own points of view. Just to set the stage, I thought I would also show how, at least growing up, when I was a child in India, we had a lot of these goddesses as sort of, obviously we prayed to them, but they were goddesses, means they were women. And these women had all kinds of characteristics. They were, the one on the left is Goddess Durga, who was nurturing, loving, the mother. The one in the middle, Saraswati, with the musical instrument, is the goddess of learning. So every child worshipped Goddess Saraswati in order to become a good scholar. And then the one on the right is Goddess Kali, who was the source of energy. So growing up, we had a lot of religious women figures who provided us with all kinds of role models. But it was not just religious, it was also in the real world. I have two pictures here, Indira Gandhi, that you have heard of, who used to be the Prime Minister of India. And today, the current President of India is a woman, Mrs. Patil. Of course, there's a dark side to India, too. Women can get married at very, very early ages. All those girls dressed up are young brides. Unfortunately, some of these brides do not bring enough dowry, and they are tortured. So there is a dark side, but women are a large part of India's economy, particularly the informal sector. So the two pictures on the left shows women contributing to the economy in the farms. They work in the farm side by side with the husbands and the male members of the household, but they also participate in the buying and selling of household goods and the farm-grown produce. But it's also true that when women become widows, the society doesn't find them so valuable, and there are issues about treating them. So in order to kind of understand India and the role of India, we have these multiple perspectives. It's multi-layered, reasonably complex, and to get an understanding of India's role in terms of women in Indian society, the first speaker we have is Minal Hajratwala. Minal comes from California. She is the author of a book called Leaving India, My Family's Journey from 5 Villages to 5 Continents. It was published this year in 2009. She spent 7 years researching and writing the nonfiction book, traveling the world to interview more than 75 members of her extended family. The book has been called Incomparable by Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Alice Walker and Searingly Honest by the Washington Post. Our bookstore has copies of the book available for purchase, and should you buy one, Minal will gladly autograph a copy of the book after the presentation. She's a poet, a performer, a queer activist based in San Francisco. She's a graduate of Stanford University and was a National Arts Journalism Program Fellow at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Please welcome Minal Hajratwala.
Good evening. There's a little step back here. How nice. Is the sound fine? In the photograph, my great-grandmother is well into her 80s, squatting waist-high in shiny leaves. She was born in India around 1886, married my great-grandfather sometime before 1909, and lived a few more years after this photograph was taken in the late 1960s. Here, she is in the yard of her eldest son's home, a spacious bungalow in the capital of the Fiji Islands, thousands of miles from the pure blue thrash of the Pacific and of the village of her birth. But the crop that she's harvesting is familiar to her, beta leaf or pan, our people call it, the bitter, sharp leaves, folded and stuffed with spices, pastes, a smear of tobacco, sweeten the mouth after a meal and stain the tongue vermilion like the beaks of certain tropical birds. As she crouches, her head hunches forward, her shoulder blades nearly touch her heart, her skin hangs thinly as an old sari, sun-brown, translucent. In her family are a dozen young people who could accomplish this chore more easily. And quickly, Maji, everyone calls her now, Ma for mother, Ji for respect. Please, Maji, they beg, let us help you. But Maji insists on doing it alone. No one can choose the smoothest and best shaped leaves as well as she can. No one can season the meat, nor set the proper amount of rice to boil, nor arrange a marriage without her supervision. Each of her instructions and principles comes directly from the old country and is therefore imbued with the authority of generations, passed down from mother-in-law to daughter-in-law like a collection of sacred texts. Maji takes full credit for how well her family here in Fiji holds to the old ways, reliving India in every mouthful. Her own wedding and widowing are dim memories, for long before she was Maji, matriarch of a sprawling and prosperous clan that lives around the world, she was Kashi, a young village girl whose name meant heaven, whose husband traveled across 2 oceans, visited home only once, and died, leaving her with 3 sons. Her brother had sailed in another direction to South Africa. Maji sent her sons to Fiji to work in the family business, and her grandsons after that. She herself, though, refused to leave India, and so most of the men, as they grew up, opted to leave their wives and then their children in her care at home. As long as Maji was in India, India was the motherland. Her strong personality kept everyone in line. 3 daughters-in-law, 20 grandchildren, dozens of great-grandchildren. Her muscle power helped make ends meet. She worked a heavy stone mill to grind spices to sell. She wove and taught the craft to the family's girls. My oldest aunt remembers starting at the spinning wheel at Maji's knee when she was barely 6 years old. Finally, in the 1960s, besieged by ill health, Maji consented to cross the ocean and join the rest of her family in Fiji. She was coughing incessantly, painfully, all day and sometimes all night long, suffering from a rare genetic disease, her lungs rigidifying, their capacity shrinking. She had outlived her husband, 2 of her sons, and everyone of her own generation. It was becoming more and more difficult to breathe. At 98 years old, she succumbed. Illiterate, Maji left no record of her struggles, her inner thoughts. What we know is that she never changed with the times, neither in fashion nor in thought. Others might eat Western bread or wear brassieres under fancy embroidered blouses, but Maji ate rotli and shak, rice and dal. She wore only cotton tied with string, white, homespun, the garb of widows, for 50 years. If diaspora is in the details that women carry or abandon, my great-grandmother packed every one into her suitcases when she crossed the seas. We have been unpacking ever since. Good evening. I wanted to start with that story about my great-grandmother. And before I launch into my talk, I also just want to quickly say thank you so much to the professors who organized this colloquium and everyone else who helped to put this on. I know this is a lot of work to do this event, and it's lovely to be here. I'd like to talk tonight about women and storytelling as a form of power. One of the great insights of the feminist movement in this country has been that the personal is political. And so I think in addressing this topic of leadership, perhaps we need to look no further than our own families for models. In terms of Indian society, I want to say that there really is no such thing. As those of you who have been studying India this semester know, India is a country of 1 billion people with a diaspora of 30 million people in every country of the world today. So to reduce all of that complexity and richness to one set of ideas about something like the role of women would be overly simplistic and maybe even stereotypical. So I want to say at the outset that what I'm talking about tonight is really one aspect, which is the intimate society, if you will, of my family. And through the women in my family, I felt that I could see some of the different models of how women express leadership through the act of specifically sharing or holding back information. So women like my great-grandmother wielded a very traditional form of power within a patriarchal family structure. And although this was a real kind of authority and power that she had, it was also in some ways reactionary. It harkened back to the old ways. My grandmothers also followed similar models of leadership, and what happened was that as the family spent more and more time, decades overseas, away from India, this kind of cultural transmission as a source of female power became rather marginalized. So because migration causes changes of circumstances in which there are different foods and materials available, different senses of time, and our priorities for what we do with our time really shifts, the older ways of knowledge became less relevant. And you see this even in some immigrant communities in the United States today, where the older people feel that their knowledge and wisdom has been kind of cast aside and set aside in favor of the new skills that the younger generations feel that they need to have in order to live in the new places. I should say that my book, Leaving India, is about the story of that migration over the past 100 years in my family. So starting in 1909, when my great-grandfather first left India and went to Fiji, to the present day, the book covers that entire century of history, and my interest is in what happened with women's roles through that process of migration and diaspora. This is a family tree. It's in Gujarati, which is the language of my community, and it goes back, the very top is the current generation, the little flowers and leaves, and the bottom is 13 generations ago. So the name that is just cut off by the screen is Nanji, and he was my ancestor 13 generations ago. And in the context of this talk, what's notable about this family tree is that there are no female names on it. So those histories have been, except in the memories of individual people, lost. This is my mother as a young woman. She was the first in her family to graduate from high school. She was born and raised in the Fiji Islands. She became a physiotherapist, and she came to the United States in 1967 when she married my father, who was a graduate student at the University of Iowa. And they lived in Iowa for several years, and then they lived in San Francisco, where I was born, and then we moved to New Zealand. And in almost all of those places, they were a very small minority in their community. And so the role that my mother took on, by virtue of both those circumstances and her own outgoing personality, was a different kind of role, which was the role of ambassador. And I want to read just a brief section of my mother's chapter of the book, which takes place in New Zealand, and a local newspaper found my mother and interviewed her. And they headlined the article, "Spice is the Variety of Indian Life." And the article began, "Step into the Wakari," that was a neighborhood, home of Mrs. Banu Hajratwala, and you can tell immediately by the delicate scent of spices wafting from the kitchen that this is no ordinary New Zealand home. In fact, all it would take to make you feel you have entered a different world altogether would be for Mrs. Hajratwala to greet you in her sari. Quote, "But with all this snow lying around, I'm afraid you'll just have to forgive me for not wearing one today," unquote, the attractive mother of two, clad in Kiwi-style jumper and slacks, joked. So that was sort of one part of this article, which went on to describe my mother's cooking and the house that they lived in, and a little bit about her physiotherapy position in the town where they lived. I'll just read a little more from her section of the book. "On a personal level, my parents met with acceptance and respect. As ambassadors of their people, they performed remarkably, but sometimes they longed for the easier comfort of home, to go off stage, to speak without translation, to be understood without anyone making a special effort. The whole South Island of New Zealand had no Indian restaurants, no grocery stores. Any cultural event had to be organized by my parents and a handful of others. The few dozen other Indians in their university town were mostly students or visiting scholars who came over for meals but, unable to secure permanent permits because of New Zealand's whites-only immigration policy, orbited home after a couple of years. The cultural isolation of their life in New Zealand was profound." And so this ambassador role is a kind of leadership role that women can take on that really can only take place in a site of cultural difference and distance. And that has its costs, as it did for my parents in this time of their lives, in loneliness and isolation. And it also results in the kind of storytelling that women do in those situations is often a remaking that is shaped by equal parts nostalgia and innovation, and generally has a very positive spin. So it's partly communication, translation, and a little bit of marketing also that we're doing in these ambassador kind of situations. I want to talk about another kind of storytelling, which is one that feminists have often uncovered, which is the story of female suffering and oppression. And those of us who come from feminist studies backgrounds in particular are familiar with this kind of story. And in this case, it's the story of my cousin Mala, who's the younger woman in the picture. Standing next to her is my mother, and sitting down is Mala's mother-in-law, holding Mala's baby. And Mala's story is actually the flip side of my great-grandmother's story, the story of the powerful matriarch. So if the oldest woman, the mother-in-law in the family, is the person who holds that power and authority, the youngest woman, the daughter-in-law of the family, is often the one who suffers the brunt of that. And there is a long textual tradition also of that backs up this power differential. I'm reading from Mala's chapter now. In the Mahabharata, thought by scholars to be 4,000 years old, a virtuous woman is described as follows. She was always attentive to her husband, and whatever he did, she did the same. She did not stand outside the house or hold long conversations with anyone. She got up early. She did the household work with her own hands. She looked after her parents-in-law. She washed her husband's feet. She never showed anger. She attended to the needs of all family members. She was the first person to get up every morning and the last one to go to bed. This consensus on a woman's role has the deepest of roots and is woven throughout the sacred literature as well as popular culture. While a Hindu man's life is traditionally divided into 4 stages, each representing a stage of his spiritual growth, a Hindu woman's is divided into only 3: daughter, wife, widow. Each is a relative status, a reference to her role vis-a-vis male kin. And of the three, by far the most important, the one that all of history seems devoted to praising or regulating, is wife. Wife is the status she must achieve and then hold on to at all costs, so much so that one classical heroine, upon the death of her husband, is said to have followed the god of death all the way to the gates of the underworld in order to restore her husband to life and save herself from being a widow. One of the worst slurs one can call a woman in Gujarati, a curse word akin to cunt, is ran, or widow. For a woman who is divorced, there is no word, the phenomenon being so uncommon that we must insert on the rare occasions when a reference is necessary, and always in that special undertone of projected whisper that is reserved for shame, the English word, divorcee. So my cousin Mala really suffered under this idea of what a woman's role in the family was, and her mother-in-law in particular took each of these admonishments very literally and enforced them upon her for many years. And really it was through a process that is a bit too long to describe in detail here, of rewriting and reinscribing a new kind of story and coming up on her own and with the encouragement of her sister and a neighbor with a new idea, a new story of what a woman's role in the family could be. Mala went into her marriage very young and naive and felt that she really just had to keep everybody happy. And in fact, that was the idea that her own family also encouraged her to do. And she endured quite a bit, and in the book, she talks about how she came out of that process by finding a different way to tell her own story to herself, so that she learned that she could be a good wife, a good mother, a good daughter-in-law, but that did not mean completely bowing to another person's whims. And she eventually left the cocoon of her extended family and now lives in Los Angeles. She works very hard. She works 3 low-wage jobs. She still lives with her husband and her sons. And but when she talks to me about her life now, what she says most is that she has freedom. And by that, she means that she has the freedom to control her own daily activity. So it's not a freedom from hard work or anything like that, but it is a sense that she herself is the one making decisions about her own life, and her half an hour of leisure time is her own without somebody else beckoning her to do something for them. My feeling is that when we look at history in this intimate way, what becomes clear is actually that there's a lot of variation by class and migration status, as well as race and racism that shapes us. And each of these women have different roles and different experiences. And so I feel that looking at individual stories and individual lives actually saves us from the trap of overdetermining gender and beginning to make generalizations. And that instead of that general idea of women in Indian society, which is our launching place for this discussion, that generalization begins to collapse, and that actually out of that collapse, we can begin to taste some of the truth of our actual experiences as women of Indian descent. I'll shift now to my own story. That's me. When I was 7 years old, we left New Zealand and we moved back to the United States. And I'll read a bit about myself. Deep in the marrow of every story is a silence. Having struggled all these pages to be transparent, not to overwhelm the stories of others with my own interpretations. Now it is my turn to emerge, solid, and I hardly know where to begin. I have practiced the art of submergence, invisibility, assimilation all my life. To metamorphose now from neutral narrator to embodied character seems a great act of exposure. Vulnerability, guilt, freedom, sympathy, which thread shall I pull first? How shall I unravel or construct from all of my memories and aches one true pattern, one set of possibilities, one spine? In New Zealand, I believed we had our own special language, a delightful sing-song made up by my parents. It was a code we could use in the public park where we fed our stale bread ends from the week to the ducks, or in the grocery store to discuss the funny-looking woman nearby, or to complain about prices that were too high. No one could decipher our secrets. We used it just for fun, too. My mother said it was time to interpinter the laundry, to move it from the washer to the dryer. A bumpy road was so gabber-goober, she complained. She could double any word or name to humorous effect or for emphasis. Minal, binal, TV, beevy, bowling, foaling. It was only when we visited India when I was 4 years old that I understood there was a world of other people who spoke the same funny way. Gujarati was a lilting, rhyming language, and with a child's knack, I absorbed it completely in the 6 weeks of our visit. By the time we left India, I had forgotten all of my English. I never thought of myself as an immigrant until I began writing this book. Because I was born in San Francisco and now live in San Francisco, my mind had skipped over the years of disruption in between, the 7 years in New Zealand, the year in Michigan, the year in Iowa, the week in Florida, the 7 years in Michigan. I believed that I was only the child of immigrants, not an immigrant myself, but the truth is I have lived through multiple migrations, shifts from one world to another, and these geographic shifts were mirrored and amplified into emotional, mental, and even sexual ones. Each time I cross a border, I feel the pull and push in my body, a cacophony of competing desires, and always there are choices to make, what to assimilate, what to reject. Is it true that we are always, as migrants and the children of migrants, attempting to choose between what my parents call the best of both worlds? Or is it possible to transcend or enter into the dualism, the splitting, the uncertain interstices between the worlds? Is it possible to integrate or even heal the trauma of crossing, of so many crossings? So my sense in writing this book was that I had been a divided person. This is me in middle school. So my parents put me in classical Indian dance lessons and also in violin lessons. And I did travel in both these worlds. And this kind of division of having an Indian mask and an American mask was something that I experienced for most of my growing up period. And then when I went to university, I experienced what I now think of as another kind of migration, which is that I came out as a lesbian, actually 20 years ago this month. Each of these migrations creates a kind of split that can be painful because it means leaving behind some part of some other world. And yet it's also like growing another eye. It becomes a new stance from which to view and also to tell the story. So I think that another role that we as women sometimes have developed in diaspora is this powerful narrative stance that is both the insider and the outsider at the same time, looking in from the outside, looking out from the inside, and that in the integration of those points of view and those stories, there can be a kind of healing, which is in itself, I think, a kind of leadership. So whether it is keeping the secrets and knowledge, traditional knowledge of a community intact and passing it down as my great-grandmother and grandmothers did, or becoming an ambassador and confronting the challenges of translation and exotification as my mother did, or surviving difficulty by changing the story entirely as my cousin Mala had to do, or speaking out about things previously kept silent and reweaving many fragmented stories into a whole cloth. Women have always led by understanding the power of narrative and of words. And I think perhaps that leadership begins with a quality that is inherent in all of us from the time that we're very small children, and a quality that I think drives us in settings like this one as well, which is curiosity. These are my nieces, surrounded by their cousins. So my sister-in-law and my brother were high school sweethearts. My sister-in-law is part Finnish, part German, parts Dutch, all parts blonde. And so that's obviously her sister's daughter in the middle, in the second from the, whatever that side is. And then the ones on the other end are my cousin's daughters, so from our side of the family. And then my three nieces are the medium-toned girls. And I'll close with a little section about the oldest one, who's right in the middle there. At age 5, Zoe adores both Dora the Explorer and the Hindu monkey god Hanuman. She loves both the grandfather who taught her the University of Michigan fight song and the one who tells her long stories drawn from the great Indian epics. She's also old enough to explore her identity, coming up with such apparently spontaneous formations as, I'm Indian, Ava and Taya are Indian, Daddy's Indian, but Mommy's not Indian, right? Along with, I'm a girl, Mama's a girl, Daddy's a boy, Ava's a girl, Taya's a girl. Grandpa, do you have a penis? Diaspora is nothing if not an endless series of questions. May they proliferate. Thank you.
Next, we have Indira Parikh as our speaker, who will provide a little different perspective on the role of women in Indian society. Indira joins us from Pune, India, where she is the founder president of the Foundation for Liberal and Management Education. And she started this organization, an educational institution, after she retired as the dean of the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad. Her academic specialization is organizational behavior, and she has worked extensively in the areas of corporate culture, identity, and women issues in India. She has received several Lifetime Achievement Awards for her contribution to HR, for teaching, and for her visionary leadership. Please welcome Dr. Indira Parikh.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ruby, for inviting me. I was telling her coming here was an opportunity to meet my son in Houston. So it's been a very wonderful visit, and I go back home tomorrow. After a very poetic rendering of a personal life saga, a family saga, my presentation is about a whole lot of corporate Indian women who have broken through many barriers, who have shed many chains and shackles and grown into the organizations to take their places and lead organizations, and also, as you have seen, be CEOs of some companies. So I'm talking about patterns of how women have traveled. You know, Indian women also carry a lot of heritage. 5,000 years of women as role models. They also carry a whole lot of baggage, chains and shackles put upon them by societies centuries after centuries. And they rule themselves with their heart and their soul and their being at one level. And their logical heads and their rationality and their education pulls them in another direction. So what I'm going to now show you for the next 5 to 7 minutes are the heart, soul, and spirit where Indian women carry both the baggage as well as the heritage, which shapes their identity and across history of time. And then I will talk to you about the discontinuities they have initiated and how. The basic philosophy of India is that there is a male and there is a female. And the male is the conscious, the instrumental, the forging ahead, the creator. And on the other side is the female, the unconscious and the nurturing and the fostering. And put together, the universe of human beings are created. From this came the concept of half man, half woman, that both put together take the consciousness and the unconsciousness forward. It's a god and a goddess. Followed by what Ruby had shown, Durga. This is from the eastern part of the country, representing energy and strength. To the power and destroyer of evil. She has both the faces. To the concept of the woman being the consort. She is the goddess Parvati. Several times and in several births married to Lord Shiva after a lot of penances and sufferings. This is the goddess Kali, destroying evil. Now this is the gentler version, another goddess. This is the goddess of knowledge and wisdom and learning, which Ruby showed. This is the goddess of wealth, and everybody would worship her because it would generate and give a lot of wealth for the family. Then comes the other images. We pass on to the next level of goddesses. This is goddess Ganga, which is our holy river. And the river has come from the head of another god. And here she is riding the fish. Then comes a series of devotees who are the women who are into devotion. This is the consort Radha. And then as the stories go, she is older than Krishna. She is a relative of Krishna, devoted to Krishna. And whenever Krishna would play the flute, she would not really know what she is doing, what she is engaged in. She would leave the home and run to where the flute is flowing. And both of them are worshipped, and the subtle difference is that it is always Radha's name which comes first and Krishna's name comes later because of her devotion. Another picture, this is a very ancient painting, and again I'm bringing all this to show the women's role and position. Krishna is washing Radha's feet. It's one of the rarest pictures which one of my colleagues found it because she's a filmmaker. So she said, I will give you something which many people cannot see. There's another one which is similar where Radha is madly in love, gracious to Krishna without wearing any sandals, and Krishna is cleaning her, washing away, dusting away the dirt from her feet. Again, it's one of the rarest pictures. Then comes the epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata, where the women, the protagonists or the men, it has a very different connotation. She is Sita, who is the wife of Lord Rama, and goes through a lot of suffering, and to prove her physical chastity has to walk the fire to prove to the community and to the public that she is pure. This is another major epic, Draupadi in Mahabharata, where she marries 5 men, is played off in the game of dice, and is being disrobed in a court, a king's court, with 13 men sitting who cannot do anything because the code of conduct says they cannot, and that is the indignity. This is again another of the rare picture of a woman priestess in a community of religion where the clothes, the priests don't wear clothes, and but she's one of the only woman priestess in that community. This is another devotion, Mirabai, who is devotee to Lord Krishna, and she is asked to choose between remaining with the prince to whom she has been married or the king to whom she has been married, and to drink poison if she does not leave the devotion to Krishna, and she chooses to drink poison. Historically, it is Rani Laxmi Bai, a widow of her king in somewhere in Madhya Pradesh. She fought the British at the age of 18 and 19 and was killed and became a martyr. This is one of the Hindu tradition in Nepal, where a young girl before puberty is chosen as a goddess and worshipped until the day she gets her puberty. This is the image which is idealized in India, a woman who, in order to sustain her family, her children, when the husband disappears, does not have enough animal wealth, so she will till the ground by playing the role of a horse. She would take the plow and till the ground. And this was the image idealized and glorified about India in the 60s and the 70s, or maybe a little earlier. Then comes the political leaders, Indira Gandhi. Mother Teresa being Mother Teresa because it was India. And finally, I come to the corporate women. This is where the discontinuity starts, because from the time the Indian girl child grows up, these women goddesses are idealized and women internalize it. And come about 60, 70 years ago, when the education became very important, parents discovered and women discovered that education is the only way to get out of a role which logically does not make sense. Their aspirations and dreams are not anchored in the logic, and following the path of the continuity a few thousand years. And so around the 1950s, and this is where my research has been done, the first set of women, highly educated, intelligent, waiting for marriage, started to join their family businesses. Some because the husband had passed away, some because the family did not have any male heirs. By reluctantly or otherwise, sometimes without a choice, they entered into the corporate world. Very hesitant. Many of them took the social roles which were, so if they were young, they became daughters and nieces to older men. Older men treated them as children, but very rarely as women entering professions. Very rarely as women working. Everybody thought they passed their time. Very soon women discovered that they are capable, they are competent, and can do very well. I have been part of organizations which had a policy of not introducing women, but invited me as a consultant, and I asked them, why are you seeking me as a consultant when you do not have any women in your organization, not even a receptionist or a secretary? They said, well, we've heard of you, you are educated, you are intelligent, you are looking after your family, so we want to see how it is going to work out. You are a safer bet to come as a consultant rather than as an employee. And several of these family-owned organizations then recruited women and now have almost 15 to 20% as women in their organizations. Women, by and large, entered a decade later than men into formal work organizations as we know it today, but they made very rapid progress. So when these first generation women entered, as I said, they went into social roles, did a lot more work, very often took on the responsibilities of pouring tea and serving tea and all kinds of things. Did not like it very much, went back home and looked after their families, sometimes mothers-in-law who were not very kind to them, but they did what had to be done because work was a place which they could call their own. Work was a space which was their space, and they could have a little bit of freedom to really give an expression to what they were thinking. The second generation women were by this time, education became really the key to success, so they moved to doing exceedingly well, entered professional institutions, did very well in academics, got picked up by organizations, and they sought jobs which the organization said you cannot do. You cannot go to villages, there are no toilets. You cannot go to these places because there are no special toilets. You need to travel into areas which most women do not go. And this group of women said, we will go. You give us a chance, you give it to us, and we will go. And these were the essence of career-oriented women. They competed with men, were resented by men, demanded equality, asked for equal rights, and yet, with all of this push and this pull, they still continue to grapple with the centuries-old idealized women. Let me share one experience. I was a professor, and I used to do a lot of counseling, being one of the very few women on the faculty. So one day a young girl comes and starts crying. So I said, what happened? She says, I'm getting engaged. So I said, but why are you crying because you are getting engaged? She said, no, I had a discussion with my fiancé. What was the discussion? My fiancé said, see, now we need to talk. You and I are getting married. Both of us are MBAs. You are going to be earning, I'm going to be earning. Your money is my money is my father's money. Now, when when my children are born, not even our children, when my children are born, I will become a big executive, flying here and there. Every morning you should read the business magazines and on breakfast table brief me what is the status of business in the country and in the world. I said, she said, I should be looking after the children. Can I do such a thing? I said, what would you like to do? What do you want to tell him? I love him. What else would you like to tell him? She had nothing to say. And but the very same women did exceedingly well. And the whole dilemma of what is brought up in the family, of what is an ideal, deified, glorified wife and a woman, continues to haunt the emotional psyche of Indian women. By this time, of course, these women became role models. They had only men as role models. Not many women were into senior positions. These women broke through the middle-level barriers and went into senior management positions. And therefore, the next generation of women who entered, which was around the 90s, had women as role models, but women as role models who had internalized male role models. So they had a very difficult time in trying to even accept what was the right value, what was the right response, what was the right thing to do. However, these women really struggled with themselves, with the organizations. They were considered to be capable, competent women, highly educated, achievement-oriented, and they still managed the homes. And in India, it is a very supportive system in terms that if you can afford it, you can have a lot of help in the household, which gives you the time and the opportunity to do what you're doing. And there was a transition for these women from a job-oriented 9 to 5 in the home, playing a very social role, to the career-oriented women, still playing a social role, but their in-laws by and large only visited them during a certain periods of time, so they could manage those times when the husband would not enter the kitchen, and when the minute the in-laws would leave, the husband could enter the kitchen and be helpful to them. So there was second major transition. The third major transition came when these women really reached the top positions into leadership roles. And these were the professional women. And very often these were the women who took some time off, raised their children, and then got into full drive into being professional women. And they really created a turning point where they traveled everywhere. It was almost like they were from homes to the corporate boardrooms, taking major decisions to drive the company, to drive the organization forward, and took the organization and started to be recognized for their abilities and their capabilities. Come the turn of the century, the last 10 years, again there has been a major, major shift. Women who were professionals have now become very role models for many of the younger women, and trying to manage the home and the family life, as well as creating an infrastructure of support systems which would facilitate them. But this century, there are many women who have started their own enterprises. They have become entrepreneurs. They have started the organization from their own capabilities. They have raised the funds. They have taken the organizations to heights. And these are some of the most significant women contributing and being counted as women contributing to the growth of the nation through their organizations. So in the last 60 years, at least in my own eyes, since I joined the Institute, to see how the women have transitioned from one position to another position to the other. The successful women are few, the large majority of the women are still grappling with the family dynamics of a society which does not permit women to really move forward. And I was sharing with the young students today how the coping mechanism of most women is, the head tells you, give it back, but the social coding tells you, be patient and do what you need to do and don't give it back to maintain the family peace. And one of the most findings that I have in this situation of women's emancipation, two things are myths which I would like to share. One is, in the initial beginnings, it was the men who pushed women into emancipation and moving forward, and not the women. There were men in the families, there were men in the societies who propelled the women for education. And the second part is, it is now the women who are saying, all right, you manage the home, you manage the family, but it is the man, the role of a son, which is the most difficult to cope with. Women are in the position they are in, especially married women, because it is the men who cannot differentiate or separate the role of being a good son to that of being a husband and a father. The son's role is so captivating and so incapacitating and sometimes debilitating, and that is done by women, because it is the son to the mother creates the relationship between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law, and the husband is caught between the crossfire, not being able to rise beyond that role to say the wife needs to be protected and not the mother. And this creates an immense dilemma in the family and in the woman, that if she does not get the support from a man, then she does not know what to do, where to go, what steps to take, what new beginnings to make. And believe me, there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of women who have the capability, who have the talent, who have the imagination, who have the creativity, who have the drive, but hold themselves back to walk a step behind so that the family does not get disrupted. And that is the price the majority, a large number of women pay. A lot of women similarly have broken through, continue to carry the continuities of the legacy and the baggage, as well as the heritage of the role models, which are strong and capable as much as subservient, and move forward. And at the same time, they have created a new path, a path which never existed before. But each woman has a story of some woman who is exceedingly strong, who is exceedingly capable in the family, who is then relived, their life sagas are relived, as Minal was saying. There are always women in India. So India is a land full of contradictions. It's a land full of contrariness. It's a land full of simultaneous contradictions existing in the same person and in the educated, intelligent, competent, capable woman. It is really not the balancing of the home and the balancing of the profession. It is what the heart, soul, and spirit aspires and dreams and wants to fly, the infiniteness of the skies, but at the same time is held back by the baggage which she carries, which she has internalized from times immemorial of a country which works with simultaneous contradictions. But once a woman breaks through, she goes and takes the steps. In a short period of time, receives all the brickbats, all the criticisms, all the name calling, you name it and she will be called that. If she can live through that and get out of that, then right or wrong, she becomes right. That is the time. And so when I work with the women, I say, when you make a beginning, when you make a departure, when you take a step, Nobody's going to put rose petals to walk for you. They are going to be thorns. Walk them over. You will hurt, you will bleed, but once you have crossed that, then skies, the infiniteness of the skies, and what you do will be considered right. And that has been the experience of many women who are now growing into corporate positions. So as you can, with this, I will just end with a very small story. My grandfather and my grandmother was in one way very traditional, but in another way she was a very strong, powerful woman. And I've seen them both argue, and both of them had gone deaf. And they would fight it out about saying that they should speak gently, because I was around. I lived with them for 2 years. And all the time the fights was about how the women of the family need to walk a step forward and make the family proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask our student representatives to come up and give Indira and Minal their vote of thanks. Jesse, speak into the mic.
Dr. Indira Parikh, on behalf of the URI Honors Colloquium program, we would like to offer you the small token of our appreciation.
Minal, on behalf of the honors program and the students of the class, we would like to offer you a gift as a token of our thanks.
I hope you have questions. Today we'll have a little different format. We'll use this mic, and the panelists will answer from the table there. So if you have a question to a specific panelist, please ask Indira or Minal, or if you have a general question, they could take turns answering. So if you don't mind, we have this microphone for the use of anybody who would like to ask a question.
Hi, I have a question regarding expectations of women. How in the past it has been always, treating the mother-in-law a certain way and always smiling, things like that. Do you think that expectations of, working and making the family proud could possibly add more pressure to women who do want to excel and work, but also in the family? Do you think that piles on more expectations just as it has in the past?
The expectations from women, it is to say that they're going to be in the husband's home. But what is happening is also the son leaves the home with the wife. And what is now happening is that these women, the girl child, is by and large looking after the parents, rather than the son looking after the parents. And families being small now, with 1 or 2 children, now it is kind of expectation is that the girl child in some of the homes, not the majority, is anyway going to look after the parents. So when the girl child arrives, there is not a mourning to do, but they kind of accept the girl child. And therefore, the expectations from the girl child to study, be educated, and be able to manage her life and not be dependent on the family is very great. And this is for the educated. But there are majority where the girl child is going to be the daughter-in-law of the other house, and only the guest in this house because she's here for a short time. So again, both the contradictions exist quite heavily in India and for the girl child. And therefore the girl children say, we've got to do the best we can to be economically independent and therefore have a little more choice and a little more comfort.
In the diaspora, I think that the expectations and the contradiction and pressures is a little bit different in the sense that there is a pressure usually from the society in the place where people migrate to assimilate and blend in and learn the language and behave like Americans or behave like Australians or whatever it is. And then at the same time, there's a pressure from the community to retain the traditions, remember the language, continue to wear the traditional clothing and cook the traditional food and observe the traditional rituals and religious rites and so on. So the workplace is sort of a third site, but I would say that generally in diaspora, the workplace is part of the more assimilationist side of the pressure, which also takes place in contexts like the PTA and other kinds of, societal settings that involve engaging the wider society.
Hi, I have a general question about the views of women in India. I know that in India they see women with fair skin and lighter eyes as more attractive and more desirable. Do you see that changing anytime soon as more women can become empowered in India, or do you think that will stay for a while?
If you see the columns in marriage, advertisement for marriage, the men or the families are looking always for a fair and a homely, fair, educated, and a homely wife. This, what you're asking, I come from a community which is generally very fair. And my mother is very fair and very beautiful. I was her ugly duckling. And it is, the pattern still is the same. If you're born a dark child, you remain with that. I was called when I was entire growing up life until the time I got married. And because I got married and came to America, somehow I became fair. But in the 18 years that I was with my family, I was called that I was like an eggplant or a coal. This is prevalent, and I think it will remain prevalent. It doesn't go away. So it's hard on women, but the only thing they can do is prove and become more competent.
It's also very much a class issue, and so as the middle class expands in India, my understanding is that more women have the disposable income to spend on things like bleaching creams and cosmetics and other procedures that will, I think there's even a laser way to lighten your skin now. And these kinds of things are being marketed very heavily to the expanding middle class in those regions where you saw the dollar signs on the map in particular. And certainly the convergence of Bollywood and Hollywood is intensifying it. So even if you look at the people who do film studies can notice that Indian films, the heroines of Indian films now are much lighter than they were a generation ago. And that has a profound effect on the public conception of what beauty is. So unfortunately, I think that Indira is right. It doesn't look like that trend is going away anytime soon, and in fact, maybe expanding. And again, that is largely something that has to do with the middle and upper classes. The lower classes in India obviously don't have the income to spend on things like that or really worry about things like that. And it is also the case in a very generalized sense that poor people in India tend to be darker and rich people tend to be lighter anyway. It's a function of the caste structure and the way that the caste stratification has occurred, which is a history that goes back thousands and thousands of years, and of course, is not across the board. So you do see some dark people in the upper castes and so on, but the linkage of skin color to caste and class and income is part of what helps to reinforce that notion that fair and light is more and more desirable.
Would you also say in that the values have changed when they look for brides? Before they might have looked for a fair skin, but now they would like to get a bride who can earn, who has qualification and who can earn.
So the question is, do you think that the values have changed so that before they would have looked for someone who was more fair, but now they're looking for someone who is more educated or has a value where they can earn and bring income to the family?
They're looking for that as well, but the girl needs to be fair.
Hello. I have two questions. One is I was wondering if you would address some of the things that are happening for poor women. If they're in with poor men, if they're in a heterosexual arrangement, are poor women finding power at all? I mean, what's going on there? And then I was also hoping you would talk a little bit about the reception of lesbians in India, since that would seem to break the desired pattern.
I'll take the second question first. So I live in the United States, and so I'm not intimately familiar with the state of things in India, although I am excited to go to India next month and launch my book there, and I hope to meet with queer activists, among other people, and learn more about that. But my understanding is that there's a long history, a thousands-of-year-old history in India of same-sex behavior and partnerships, but the structuring of that as an identity is relatively modern, as it is in the West as well. And so the idea of someone being a gay person or being a lesbian is what's new, but the behavior itself is old, and there is evidence in sculptures, in texts, in lots of sort of documented places of people writing about, describing, depicting visually same-sex behavior. The cultural values around that are really just a huge range, from one extreme, which is sort of tacit acceptance and incorporation into the fabric of villages, so that it's just understood that that's the way a person is and they can't do anything about it, and they're still part of the family, part of the village, and in a way that is the way that a traditional village functioned, was that everybody was included. So whether you were gay, or whether you had a mental illness, or whether you were alcoholic, or whether you saw visions, or whatever, you were still part of the village, and the village took care of its own villagers. So that's one way that gay people were sort of incorporated into the fabric of being, as well as whatever sexual behavior they had, being daughters, sons, even marrying, having, carrying on familial duties while perhaps having their own partners and lovers on the side. So there's that end, and then on the other end, there's religious extremism, which counts that behavior as a sin and really comes down hard on it. And so and everything in between. So really there are these tensions. for gay people as a movement, that emerged in the 1990s as an identity, and partly spurred by the AIDS movement and the AIDS disease, and the need to organize specifically around sexual behavior and to reach out to people who were most at risk. Gay men began organizing. It was interesting that Indira showed the image of Ardhanarishwara, the half male, half female deity, because that deity has been claimed by some in the gay movement in India, who say that homosexuals are in fact the perfect blend of male and female characteristics, and that this is now their patron god. And lesbians in particular organized around the release of a movie called Fire, about 10 years ago, made by Deepa Mehta, whose other film you'll be seeing this weekend, which depicts two women in a relationship, and the women have these names that are loaded with Indian history. Their names are Sita and Radha, whom you just heard a lot about. So that film created a lot of controversy. It was banned in parts of India. There were large religious protests against the film, and in response there were feminist and gay counter-protests to support the film, and that marked another place in the emergence of the lesbian movement in India. And just this past year, the High Court of India passed down a ruling that for the first time in 150 years decriminalized gay sex. So under Queen Victoria, a law had been passed in India that made sodomy illegal. That law has now been taken off the books, and that just happened a few months ago. So all of this gay organizing is happening in India, and there's really a range of reactions. And maybe Indira can speak to the question about poorer women.
But there is one community, the transsexual community. That identity is well established in India, and they also have a role in the society, like when a child is born or when a marriage takes place, these groups of transsexuals come, and their entire livelihood is kind of managed by the money they receive on such occasions when they come. So that identity is very clearly established and accepted in the society. When the families have such a member, it is kept secret, or it is a sadness, but that community is accepted. The poor women, there are lots of NGOs who do facilitate these women in income generating activities, and there are some very large well-known movements, and one of the most well-known is by Ila Bhatt in Gujarat, where she has kind of created a cooperative called SEVA, Self-Employed Women's Association, which is a group of women who do small marketing or selling. There are other institutions which provide information, knowledge, background to set these women up into activities. However, these are the women who are also very often abandoned by the husbands with several children, and the social structure for them is very, very difficult. And those are, of course, and sometimes the stories we've had in the institution, in my earlier institution, Indian Institute of Management, where I was teaching, there were students who have come from these homes and who have risen themselves by education and by intelligence, supported by some of the groups to be able to reach the level. And some of them are doing exceedingly well in terms of jobs. And, but a large number of poor women, especially in Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, their plight is very, very heart-rendering. It is a difficult life, troubled life, and they are the ones, but they, in my view, they are the women who do look after the children, do give emphasis to education, and propel their children to go to school. There are immense number of stories where these women push their children for education, for a better lifestyle. But there is a large majority who will be suffering with poverty.
To follow on with that, would you talk a little bit about the institution of the arranged marriage? And we hear so much about the tyranny of the mother-in-law and the diary and the abuse of, it seems almost a feminist, a woman visited on woman violence having to do with marriage issues and dowry. And if you could speak to that, and the mother's role vis-a-vis the son, vis-a-vis the daughter, who arranges the marriage, who's in charge. And it appears from Bollywood that Western love and marriage is on the ascendancy as well. And how are women and how is that culture assimilating this?
That's my favorite topic, so I shall... See, I've done some research on this. And this is my analysis and interpretation, which I'm giving you, so it is mine. The marriages are arranged marriages, and it is the families who interact with each other. And they try to see that they come from a similar background and similar values and similar upbringing. And therefore, the marriage of the boy and the girl per se are incidental. It is the families who really decide each other, so that's one. So very often the compatibility is not really looked at, and only the families are looked at. The mother-son relationship is a very, a relationship which is sometimes difficult to understand because the way the whole upbringing is done in the family, the son is considered to be the one who's going to look after the parents, but by and large it doesn't happen because the wife who comes in, though she's a daughter-in-law and troubled by the mother-in-law, most of the time wants the husband to get out of the family clutches, if that's actually the right emotional word, and they leave. And then the parents are looked after by the girl and not by the boy's family, by and large. The difficulty is that the son cannot grow beyond the son's role and creates enormous guilt in confronting the mother to be doing what she's doing and that she ought not to be doing, and to take a husband's role to support the wife. That becomes a very difficult proposition. And if he does, the amount of emotional blackmail and guilt which is created enormous amounts of problems. So it is the difficulty of both the mother to let go and the son to grow up as an adult. And the only way they can do it is to leave the home and therefore manage. And no matter how I would like to believe, we are 4 sisters and 2 brothers, and I thought with being 4 sisters, my mother would be kinder to the sisters-in-law. Actually, I'm kinder to my sisters-in-law who respect me and love me, but my mother is as difficult a mother-in-law as any, and it's very difficult to imagine this. And I keep telling her, we are 4 sisters married into 4 different homes, and you get upset when one of my sisters was treated very badly. Why do you do this? And it just doesn't connect. Even to my mother, it doesn't connect. These 4 girls are into other homes, and these 2 girls have come home, so they need to be treated with respect, love, and affection. It doesn't happen. I definitely tried to be a very different kind of a mother-in-law. I let them go. I said, you, your wife, yours.
Just to address the other part of your question, my sense is that the same forces that led to an end to arranged marriage in Europe and in the West are leading to a transition from widespread arranged marriage to more frequent love marriages. And those forces really are actually more economic than psychological, and they have to do with the need for manual labor in the household in order to allow the home to function as an economic unit. And so as that pressure for agricultural or manual labor sort of drops off, family size shrinks, and also the need to make these strategic, economically motivated matches also diminishes, and people are more, young people are more sort of begin to experience more freedom and agency in both their choice of occupation, which is something that education opens up, because traditionally one's occupation was one's father's occupation and one's father before him. And so they experience that new agency in both occupation and in relationships and other aspects of their lives. And that's my sense of what is driving some of that shift both in India and in the diaspora around the arranged marriage, love marriage thing, along with, of course, the influence of popular culture and so on. Yeah.
I have just one follow-on question.
Follow-up question.
If you expect the son to manage you when you become an older person in whatever culture you have, you are often sadly mistaken as one who often deals with aging parent situations. Invariably, if there is a woman in the family, they will deal with it, and it appears to me to be hardwired behavior. But you're saying you see the same thing in India, that the idea is the son to carry on the care of the parents and the in-laws, but it generally falls to his spouse. That's what we see, too.
And of course that, yes, and of course that idea that the son and the father play these roles is something that takes place in patriarchal, patrilineal societies. And I think it's also important to say that some parts of India and some groups and tribes within India are also matrilineal and matriarchal. And so there the family dynamics are very different.
Just the last one. In all of this, the man of the house keeps quiet.
One of the most popular television series in India was a series called The Mother-in-Law Was Once a Daughter-in-Law Too. And it ran for many years. It was very, very popular. Thank you, Indira and Minal, for sharing your perspectives about women. Minal's book is available outside if anybody would like to have a copy. And the two Fridays and Saturdays film festival, and I'm not sure of all the stories. Maybe there is a mother-in-law, daughter-in-law story in there. Please join us if the time is available. And next Tuesday, it's about entrepreneurship. Thank you.